Okay, so this is coming out a bit later than I'd meant it to this week, but I hope you all had a happy holiday. At least those of you who celebrate Independence Day here in the United States. But for all of you, we are now in the middle of the 8th week of our summer session, which means that we'll be shifting gears, moving away from poetry and toward drama. I'll be sending out emails that include scans of the rubrics I used to grade paper 2. I have updated your grades for paper 2, and I'll be including some instructions if folks are interested in revising their second paper with the emails that I send out with your scanned rubrics attached. I've also graded your midterm exams as well, so probably, hopefully, all of you have already checked on that already. But I just want to let everybody know that I think I've sort of updated the grade book so that all items thus far submitted have been graded. So anyway, you'll notice that the discussion forums this week are a little different. There's only one topic for you to post in, which I think many of you may be somewhat happy about. But I do want to point out that the minimum word requirement is a little longer than it has been in the past. So you only have to write one instead of two posts. But the one post does have to be a little longer than the posts in the past have been. So anyway. If none of that makes sense, just go to D2L. You should sort of see the differences on your own. But before I get sort of lost in that, I do want to say that I'll be posting the assignment sheet for your third paper, which is not due until the 12th week of the semester. But I'll be posting that probably later today. By today, I mean Wednesday. So either Wednesday or Thursday this week. Be on the lookout for the assignment sheet for paper 3, and I'll certainly send out an email notifying you that that is available as well. So anyway, all of that out of the way, let's get started with the lecture for week 8. Drama: reading, responding, writing. By the end of week 8, you should be able to articulate what drama shares with fiction, and perhaps with poetry, but what also distinguishes it from other genres as well. You should experience drama in a few different ways: reading, listening, and watching. Under the content tab for week 8, you'll see that I've included links to YouTube where you can listen to the short play Trifles. You can listen to an audio recording of it, but you can also watch a performance of it. So I would really encourage, it doesn't take much time to watch a performance of it. It's a short play. I would really encourage you to try to listen to the audio recording, but also to watch the play as well. You should practice asking factual and interpretive questions when reading a play. You should review the practice of annotating literary texts, this time dramatic texts, and there's an example of this in your textbook. You should reflect on the suggestions for writing prompts, so pages 792 to 93, just to I think it's often good to read questions about literary texts, even if they're not questions that you'll be writing answers to, just because questions get you thinking of it, get you thinking and feed your thought about how to approach a text analytically, right? So I think it's important to read through those questions. You should study the sample response to an essay on Susan Glaspell's excellent play, Trifles. You should also review the definition of and strategies for identifying theme in a literary work. Okay. So in terms of comparing fiction and drama, you'll notice that these two columns are almost identical, right? That fiction and drama share a great deal, right, with each other. They both have characters, they both have a plot, they both use symbolism. Often with drama, the very title of a play carries symbolic weight. So the title of Trifles, for instance, Trifles has a symbolic weight to it. They both have themes, obviously, like most literary works do, and setting is important for both of them as well. But if we push a little harder, we see that there's actually quite a bit different about how drama is structured. Whereas we tend to think of the plot of fiction according to what we call Freytag's pyramid, which you read about in the plot chapter. The plots of dramas tend to be broken up and structured into acts. Trifles is a one-act play, but many plays are 1, 3, or 5 acts. Almost all of Shakespeare's plays, for instance, are 5 acts. And the acts themselves are also broken up into scenes, right? So you'll see this in the way in which plays are cited, or multi-act and scene plays are cited, where they're cited according to the act number, the scene number, and often the line number, okay, or page number. In addition to setting, because plays are performed on a stage, the actual stage itself is also an element of drama, as are the various sets that are designed in order to host the performance of the play itself. And then probably the biggest elemental difference between fiction and drama is that in plays we don't have a narrator, which is often interesting to think about. We don't have a narrator, we have stage directions which are written out for us. I know plays are not quite the same thing as movies, but if you think about when a novel is adapted into a movie, one of the biggest hurdles of adaptation is that in movies you don't have narrators, right? You don't have narrators, you just have the film camera. Occasionally you have a voiceover, but you can't have a voiceover talk to you throughout a whole movie the way a narrator talks to us throughout a whole novel, right? So in the matter of drama then, and what the missing narrator is, instead of a narrator, what we have are stage directions. So when fiction really begins to take up and develop in the 17th and 18th century, many of the innovations surround that thing that we talked about and studied in our first unit called narrative perspective. Often plays share a great deal with poetry as well, especially in the case of verse dramas. We won't be reading any verse dramas this semester, but perhaps the most famous verse dramatist is William Shakespeare himself, who's also perhaps the most famous playwright and dramatist in the history of at least English literature. So for instance, if we look at Hamlet's famous "to be or not to be" soliloquy, with which many of you are familiar, you'll notice that it's written in iambic pentameter, the same metrical structure that characterizes William Shakespeare's sonnets. The soliloquy might not have a rhyme scheme, although many of Shakespeare's verse dramas at certain moments does take advantage of rhyme, but it does share many sonic qualities with poetry, right, including alliteration and assonance, for instance, and also the use of figurative language. So here's just a taste of that soliloquy, which is included in your textbook, by the way. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache, and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Anyway, it keeps going for a dozen lines or so, but I just wanted to read it out loud just so you get a sense of the sort of poetic quality of Shakespeare's plays, most of which are written in verse, meaning as poems. Anyway, another major thing that separates drama from other genres is that there are two primary ways to experience it. When we read a play, as you'll be doing over the next couple weeks, you're actually reading the original text of the playwright, right? And by doing so, you're actually reading it from the perspective of a new director, right? Who is tasked with decisions about how to interpret what the play means, how the characters should how the actors should speak the parts. As a director, you want to pay attention to the stage directions so that you know how to build the sets and all those sorts of things. When you read a play, characters are really only the combination of stage directions and dialogue, right? There's no narrator who explains to us the inner, hidden, deeper secret being of the characters, right? The characters are simply what they say and how the stage directions tell us they're saying it. That's all characters are. You have direct access to the scene and stage directions when you read the play. And also, no matter who reads the play, every reader is experiencing the same text, kind of, right? So all of you will be reading the same text and should be experiencing the text in similar ways. When we read a play, though, we have no access to what characters look like. So we don't see costumes, we don't see a stage, and we don't see a set. We have to visualize all of these things on our own. When we watch a play, what we're actually watching is a performance by actors, meaning that we're also watching an interpretation of the play. How has a particular director, and how are these actors interpreting the play in order to perform it, right? When you watch a play, characters are no longer simply words on a page, right? But characters are a combination of casting, mannerisms, body language, dialogue, and blocking, right? So much goes into how to visualize and act and perform the characters that what becomes a character is much larger than just the words on a page. In addition, and this is often the case when Shakespeare is performed, the script that a director uses is actually altered, right? And so that if you had, like, for instance, Hamlet open in front of you when you were watching a performance of Hamlet, one thing you might notice is that quite a few of the lines and even some of the scenes may have been deleted, right? This is actually quite common. And of course, when you're watching a play, you're watching it on a stage, right, with a set that's been designed for it. And sometimes a set that's been designed in a way that the stage directions don't explain, right? And because of that, every performance is different, right? Every performance of every play is different. And even every performance of the same play by the same acting troupe is different. We see this every summer here in Vermilion when the South Dakota Shakespeare Festival is put on. You have about 3 or 4 performances of the same Shakespeare play. And if you go to every performance, you'll notice that little things are different about it, right? Sometimes just little things. But of course, if you went to go see that same play somewhere else by a different acting troupe, it would be a completely different experience, right? A lot of the words might be the same, but the way in which it's performed is completely different and lends itself then to a different interpretation. And of course, one of the biggest difference in watching a play is that the stage directions are not read out loud, right? That would sort of be silly if someone off stage was reading the stage directions. No. For that reason, watching a play tends to go quite a bit faster than reading a play. And you'll actually see this if you look at the YouTube links I've put up under the content page. The audio recording of the play is a little longer. I think it's about half an hour, 35 minutes, whereas the performance of it is about 21 minutes. So if you cut out the stage directions, you actually shorten how long it takes to experience the play. So for instance, if we look at the beginning of Trifles, you'll see that the play, after the character list, begins with a long paragraph setting the scene. Okay, the kitchen in the now abandoned farmhouse of John Wright, a gloomy kitchen, and left without having been put in order. Unwashed pans under the sink, a loaf of bread outside the bread box, a dish towel on the table, other signs of incompleted work. At the rear, the outer door opens, and the sheriff comes in, followed by the county attorney and Hale. The sheriff and Hale are men in middle life. The county attorney is a young man. All are much bundled up and go at once to the stove. They are followed by the 2 women. The sheriff's wife first. She is a slight, wiry woman, a thin, nervous face. Mrs. Hale is larger and would ordinarily be called more comfortable looking, but she is disturbed now and looks fearfully about as she enters. The women have come in slowly and stand close together near the door. County attorney, rubbing his hands. This feels good. Come up to the fire, ladies. Mrs. Peters, after taking a step forward. I'm not cold. So anyway, you see that when reading it, you have to get through quite a bit of it before you actually get to the first line. Whereas if we were watching this on stage, everything in that first paragraph about the scene would not be read to us. We would simply see it, right? We would see it all. And it's up to us as the audience members to note all those details ourselves. And so then just a few seconds into the performance, right, the county attorney would walk up to a stove, rub his hands, and speak those lines. Although there might be some moments of silence so that we as an audience member can note all the things that are listed in the scene. Okay, so this is a photograph from a performance at Lamar University. Lamar is a university in Texas. So I've included a link there if folks want to sort of track down the article where I took this image from. So some questions to ask while reading plays. If you look at the pages I've listed here, you may notice that quite a few of these questions resemble questions you were to think about when reading fiction, questions about plot or character, for instance. But I've included below here a few questions that are specific to drama itself. For instance, do the stage directions describe particular settings and props in detail? The first thing you might notice if you go back and read a Shakespeare play is that there really aren't any stage directions. There are some, but they're not nearly as thorough as the stage directions in Glaspell's play or in some of the others you'll be reading in the next couple weeks. And then I'll have you can sort of read through these other ones on your own. And I see a few page numbers are missing, so I'll go back in and add those into the PDF that I'll upload to D2L. I want to pause really quickly. This is your attendance question for this week. Do you think Mrs. Wright killed her husband? If you don't know the context, you'll have to read the play first, and then just shoot me an email answering that question. Your email can even be one word, or if you'd like to elaborate a little bit about why you think yes or no, I would, of course, be happy to read why you think yes or no. So in this slide, I'm rehearsing something I went over during the first week of the semester, and that's the difference between factual questions and interpretive questions. I think for many of you, now that you're a couple papers into the semester, many of you are still stuck sort of just asking factual questions that lead you to identifying important details of a literary text, but you're not really asking questions that get you thinking about the significance or the meaning of the details that you're noticing. I often saw this in paper number 2. Folks who were able to identify an instance of personification, or for instance in the Emily Dickinson poem, which many of you read about death. You rightly pointed out that death was personified. You rightly pointed out that death was personified as a kind of like polite man stopping by, to go out of his way to pick up someone who was too busy to visit him. But very few of you who wrote about that poem, though many of you did, though some of you did, very few of you addressed why that's a surprising personification of death, right? So you identified those details. Death is personified as a polite person, but very few of you explored or elaborated why that's an unexpected or surprising view of death, or why that's a significant view of death. So anyway, I just want to sort of point that out for you. In terms of few of you. So sorry, before I move on. So I really want you to take some time reading through these introductory chapters, thinking about the differences among these questions, and how some of them sort of simply have factual answers to them, while others sort of get you thinking a bit about significance and meaning, okay? Especially questions about the theme, okay? Okay, so the last thing I want to go over, I think this is the last thing anyway, is the sample writing or the sample essay after the Glaspell play. So sorry about that. I was checking something in your textbook, just making sure those page numbers were right. I think they are. Anyway, so I just want to note some things about the sample essay that's on pages 796 to 99, written presumably by a student named Stephanie Ortega. This is not a perfect essay by any means, but it is a good example of how to go about analyzing the details of a literary text. I know for many of you who are doing the work that's being asked and expected of you, I may seem like I'm beating a dead horse, but it's also very clear to me, both from discussion posts and also the papers coming in, and even from some of the exams. Most of you did pretty well on the exam, by the way, that many of you are not studying, right? You're not actually taking the time to read and learn from the textbook, and many of you seem to be kind of just trying to get by the class. And I really want to emphasize that some of you are paying a lot of money to take this summer session, right? Or if you're not paying for it, someone is, right? And I know I can't sort of, in the sort of like structure of an online class, compel you to sort of invest more of your time into the class. I can't do that, right? And I know part of the appeal of online classes is that you can decide when and how much effort you want to put in. But some of you are not doing well. And in order to sort of bring up your grade, I think it's really important that for these last 4 weeks, you really dedicate yourself to trying to do as good as you can, as well as you can on the third paper on the final exam, and that you do the work asked of you weekly, as a majority of you are doing, right? Posting in the discussion forum, sending me the attendance email, but especially that attendance email. A shocking number of you don't even do that, which just baffles me, to be honest. So I think it's important to get back into the habit of doing those weekly tasks, doing a good job on these papers, carrying the textbook around with you if need be, and really trying to get as much out of these last 4 weeks as possible. Okay, so anyway, getting off my soapbox, here's some things to notice in that sample essay. First, note how the introductory paragraph stays focused on the play and doesn't trail off into generalities about plays, right? So the introduction doesn't start off, drama is much different than fiction. I know that, right? You don't need to talk in generalities. Get to the point. Talk about the play that you want to write about, okay? Note the paragraph summarizes a few details about the plot, but then makes a clear and arguable statement about the significance of Glaspell's focus on her women characters. The first long body paragraph on 797 clearly inventories all the ways in which Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hales are wide apart in their views. It says this in the topic sentence, and then it follows up by giving quite a bit of evidence from the play itself with some commentary attached. But thereafter, what you might notice is that each paragraph is only as long as it needs to be. Every paragraph is not as long as that first body paragraph, right? Also note that Ortega does not follow a 5-paragraph formula where each of like 3 points that she may want to give carry equal weight. Rather, she seems to have outlined how each paragraph will forward her argument, so that her later paragraphs give the strongest claims and evidence to support her thesis statement, although she could have only gotten to those later paragraphs by walking through the evidence and commentary that she gives earlier on, right? I can't emphasize enough how important it is to study these sample essays. Again, not because they're perfect, but because at the very least you'll be exposed to quality writing at the sentence level, but also to documents that have clearly been thought about before they've been written down, okay? For this third essay, you'll have a little more time to develop your argument and to think about what you want to write about. And I'll be getting that third paper assignment up soon, as I said earlier in the lecture. So it might be a good idea as early as possible to start working on that third paper, and also to be taking advantage of the writing center, and also to be working through the writing process in a much more conscientious way, a much more strategic way than some of you have been for the previous papers. So, okay, so I think that's my lecture for the week. Be sure to check D2L for all the things that all the sort of weekly tasks that I'm expecting. Check out the discussion forums, read the chapter, send me the attendance email. But of course, if you have questions about other things, the exams, the papers, your grade or other things, or if you're curious about something, apologies for this little note to myself to take out the garbage, please email me ASAP. Okay, I hope you're well, and we're nearing the end here, people, so just one more month to go, so hang in there. Okay.